Welcome to Movie Recaps. Today I'm going to tell you about the film Malena. The movie tells the story of a 13-year-old boy, Amoroso Renato, who's fascinated with a woman, Maddalena Scordia, also known as Malena. Malena is the most beautiful woman in town and much older than the young boy. One day, Renato got his new bicycle and cycled to show it off to his friends. While they were all talking, his friends said, "We have heard that Malena is about to pass through here." They sat in one place and watched as a beautiful lady walked past them. They were all carried away because of her beauty, including Renato, who had just seen her for the first time and seemed to be the most infatuated amongst them. When she leaves, the group speeds away on their bike and starts following her again. They watch until she reaches the inside of the city. Later on, the boys head to their Latin class. Renato contemplates the whole day, still in awe of Malena's beauty. He struggles to focus, and even when at home, he struggles to fall asleep. All he could think about was Malena. The next day, Renato skips school and rides to Malena's home. He sits at a distance and watches her from afar. He even imagines Malena calling out to him and asking him to buy her a cigarette and then showing him her legs. Later, Renato goes to his father's tailor to request long pants. But long pants were supposed to be worn by men and not boys, so the tailor denies him his request. But Renato goes on to convince the tailor that his father is aware of him getting long pants. At home, his father came back home from work, furious at Renato for skipping school and getting longer pants. He was so furious that he beat him. Renato argues with his father, saying he does not understand. He threatened to report his father for one of the things he would not let him do. So, his father relented and let him be. That night, Renato sneaks out of the house through his bedroom window and goes to Malena's house. He climbs a tree and peeps into the house through a hole in the window. He sees Malena lying on her couch. He watches as she stands up and walks around the room, listening to the music before he spots a family photo of Malena and her husband after their marriage. The next day, Renato overhears the men talking about Malena in a barber shop. He learned that her husband, Nino Scordia, had married her from a nearby village and brought her to their town before he was called to war a month later. Renato returns to Malena's house after his haircut. He spies on her with a telescope and watches as she sits on the chair and holds a piece of paper to her chest. Later in the night, he visits her again, peeking through a hole to watch her. This time, he sees her dancing with a picture of her husband while a song plays in the background. The next day, Renato goes to the music store and buys a copy of the song she was dancing to. When he gets home, he plays the song while looking at obscene photos of women and imagines them as Malena. The following day, Renato rejoins his friends as they race to follow Malena to the town entrance. Then he makes up an excuse to leave them before catching up with her. When he sees her, the men from the town are looking at her admiringly as she walks across the road. She stops to say hello to Dr. Cusimano, a dentist. He greets her by kissing her hand. Then she continues on her way. As she walks away, she stares at Lieutenant Cadet, who stares back at her. When she arrives at her destination, Renato sees her catching a key for a door and going into an apartment. Later, Renato goes to fix his bicycle. While he was at the repairer's shop, he spots Malena again. While Renato is still mesmerized by Malena's beauty, the other women in town are envious and disgusted by her presence. One of the women compares her to an escort in the city because they thought she was going to see a man. Renato followed her to the same apartment she visited yesterday. When she enters, he climbs the gate nearby and sees that she's visiting her father. During their morning exercise, one of Renato's friends tell him that Malena's husband had died in the battle. Later, the army decides to pay tribute to Nino. Renato attends the memorial organized for Nino, but discovers Malena was not present, so he leaves the crowd to look for her. He finds her in her father's apartment, crying in bed over the loss of her husband. Renato begins to imagine himself at Malena's side, kissing and comforting her. After the funeral procession, Renato overhears the townspeople gossiping and slandering Malena. This angers Renato and spurs him to urinate in their bags and spit in their drinks. Renato spots Malena leaving a store. Then he overhears the men from the store, who were just sympathizing with her, talking about her crudely. So he throws a rock at the store and rides away. After that, Renato sits closer to Malena's house and watches her. When she enters her house, he jumps over her fence and grabs her underwear. The next day, Renato's father walks into his room and finds him asleep with the underwear over his head. His father gets angry, hits him, and tells him he's ashamed of him. Renato's father locks him inside his room while his mother burns the underwear. After 3 days, his mother becomes concerned for him since he hasn't been eating. Later, a doctor examines Renato and tells him he needs fresh air outside. Once he was outside, Renato rides his bike to visit Malena, but the street was filled with men staring at her home. One day, in the middle of a lesson, a man comes in and hands a letter to Malena's father, who is also Renato's school teacher. The letter states that the professor is unfit to be a school teacher because his daughter has been sleeping with the whole town. The professor leaves the classroom sadly, while the students joyfully banter and sneer about Malena. Angered by the talk, Renato defends Malena and fights one of his friends. Later that night, when Renato returns to her house, he sees her talking to Lieutenant Cotti. Renato is upset when he sees him kissing her. On his way out, the lieutenant bumps into Dr. Cusimano. The dentist angrily tells him to stop pestering Malena, who he calls his fiancée. He slaps the lieutenant and they fight until Dr. Cusimano's wife arrives with the police. Then the police arrest them. The next day, the news had gone around town and everyone was discussing it. Malena goes to her father's apartment and tries to unlock the door, but the key doesn't fit. Watching this, Renato realizes that the professor has given up on his daughter. Later, Malena walks to Attorney Sintorbi's office to ask for counsel before going to court because the dentist's wife reported her for having an affair with her husband. In the courtroom, Renato watches Malena being put on trial. The judge asked her about the dentist and their relationship. She replies that he had only visited her once to give her medicine for her father and that he lied about being her fiancé. Then the judge asks about Lieutenant Cotti. She says that their relationship does not concern the law. Then the judge asks his clerk to read the lieutenant's statement. Disappointed, Malena listens as the clerk tells everyone that the lieutenant had a casual view of their relationship. Then her attorney stood up to defend her. Later, Malena and Sintorbi are dancing while Renato watches from the window. Sintorbi says the only payment he wants is Malena herself and tries to force himself on her. Renato changes his position to have a clearer view, but the tree branch breaks and he falls. The next day, at school, Renato thinks about Malena and imagines his professor as Malena. Later, Renato goes with his family to the tailor to get him long pants. He left the tailor shop to spy on Sintorbi, who's visiting his mother, and he laughs when she chases him away because she disapproves of Malena. After that, Renato follows him and finds him with Malena. He watches with relief as they ended their relationship. After this, Renato continues following Malena while the men on the street disturb her. Suddenly, Malena slows down and turns around. When he sees this, he thinks she's walking toward him, but instead, she walks past him and goes to a man behind him, Antonio, and asks for food. Suddenly, there's an explosion and everyone is running in one direction. After the bombing, Renato runs to one of the destroyed buildings where soldiers pulled out Malena's father's body. Later, Malena and her father's students join the funeral procession and his corpse is taken away to be buried. The crowd forms a line and approaches one at a time to console her. When it was Renato's turn, he was pulled back, so he stands back and watches as different men come to Malena and whisper to her. After the funeral, Malena returns home. Later that night, Renato goes to the house and watches as Malena cuts her hair. A car suddenly drives to the house and Renato runs to hide. Antonio knocks on Malena's door and she welcomes him inside. Renato watches in tears from the hole as Antonio forces himself on Malena after giving her the food he brought. The day after, Renato is walking through the crowd when he sees Malena. He's completely mesmerized as she looks more stunning with her hair dyed red. The men stared at her in amazement while the woman looked at her in disdain. Malena walks over to a table and takes a seat. She puts a cigarette in her mouth and all the men around her offer her a lighter. The next day, Renato watches Malena from the barber shop. She now has blonde hair and is with the new German soldier. He imagines what she does with the men in their hotel. Then he passes out from stress. Renato's parents were worried about him, so they take him to the church to be exorcised. His mother believes he has been possessed by the devil, but Renato's father thinks he's a growing boy and only needs to sleep with a woman to be cured. After the rituals have been completed, Renato's father takes him to a brothel where he chooses a woman and she takes him up to her room. A group of women storm into a building and pull out Malena. The women beat her up and tear her clothes. Renato watches helplessly as they cut off her hair and bruised her. They left her crying out in humiliation and pain before they cast her out. Later, Renato rides his bicycle to a train station and watches as Malena, all dressed in black, boards the train and leaves the town. Renato is sad and devastated that she was chased away without getting the chance to even talk to her. Back in town, a man steps out of a car and walks along the streets. People recognize him as Nino Scordia, Malena's dead husband. Renato follows Nino as he enters his former home. Nino is surprised to find refugees inhabiting his home and his wife nowhere to be found. They denied knowing Malena, saying nobody was living in the house when they moved in. Renato continues following Nino as he enters the office of the US Army to report about his missing wife. He told them he didn't die, but was taken to India when he lost his arm after having a malaria attack. When he comes out, he walks up to a group of men and asks about his wife, but instead they mock his wife. Angrily, Nino tells them people like himself were not supposed to fight wars for people like them. One of them slaps Nino to the ground and laughs off with the remaining men. Renato runs to help Nino and even tries to tell him about Malena, but he couldn't. Later that night, Nino returns home, sitting by the bed in deep thought. Renato drops a letter beside him and runs away. Nino learns that Malena had always been faithful to him and the destination of the train she entered before he came. Renato watches Nino immediately board the train. After some months, the town is going about its usual activities. Renato is with a girl. Everyone stops to stare at Nino and Malena as they slowly walk past and ignore everyone. Later, Malena walks into the market. Everyone greets and attends to her nicely. Renato comes up on his bike and watches her from afar. On her way home, some of her oranges fell from her bag. He rushes to help her pick it up and put it back in her bag. She thanks him and continues on her way. Then Renato speaks to her and wishes her good luck. Malena nods and walks away. Renato gets back on his bike, thinking to himself how other girls he has loved will be nothing compared to her. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notifications bell so that you never miss out on any of our latest content.